So how should India respond to the threat of these Trump tariffs, which are coming on the entire trading world starting 2nd of April? I'm now joined by somebody who knows a thing or two about Trump's thinking when it comes to international trade and this whole business of tariffs. Stephen Moore is a former economic advisor to Mr. Trump. He's in fact with the Heritage Foundation and also the author of the best-selling book, Trumponomics. Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. So the entire world is looking at Donald Trump and the threat of the tariffs. He's already announced tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China. Canada and China have retaliated. Mexico plans to retaliate as well. President Trump has been talking about tariffs against India and every trading partner starting the 2nd of April. How would you address the concerns that the entire world seems to have about these Trump tariffs?
Well, listen, the United States has been the free trade country over the last 50 years. We have the lowest tariffs in the world, and Donald Trump wants a more level playing field. He wants to have other countries bring their tariffs down when we sell our manufactured products abroad. And right now, it's not a level playing field, and Americans pay more tax than others do. So at the end of the day, what Donald Trump is saying is to India, to China, to Korea, to Canada, Mexico, you're going to have to bring your tariffs down on our products if you want us to keep our tariffs low. And I think most Americans would generally agree with that strategy. I think in the end of the day, because the American consumer market is so gigantic and so important, in terms of countries like China and India and Canada and Mexico, that at the end of the day, I think Trump will succeed in getting other countries to lower their tariffs, which would be a good thing for everybody. And we'll see.
But Mr. Moore, there is a fundamental argument against these tariffs, which is that ultimately, if America is going to impose these tariffs on China, Canada, Mexico, India, those countries are going to retaliate, much like China and Canada have already done, and Mexico is going to do as well. Ultimately, net, the result of this is that it's going to make products more expensive for the American consumer. Inflation is going to go through the roof. Already, that was the big issue during the election in 2024. So ultimately, this would be counterproductive. How would you address that particular argument?
Well, there's no question that if we have tariffs, that will cause higher prices on the things that people buy. No, you're exactly right about that. Um, so this is a dangerous game, but I think it's a game that Trump will win. I mean, Trump is a winner. He understands that every country in the world, including India, and especially China, must have access to the American market, or their economy will go into a free fall. And so, there's a little bit of a game of chicken. But I do think that at the end of the day, and I've seen Trump negotiate, I've worked with him over the last 8 years. He's a master negotiator. I think that countries like India would be well advised to lower their tariffs. By the way, that's good for your consumers, right? And it's good for our consumers as well. So we think that at the end of the day, this will work out, but it could be some rough spots ahead. But I would really urge and by the way, India is an important ally of the United States. They're an important friendly country. We don't want a trade war with China, with India, but we also want a fair playing field, which we don't think we have right now.
But Mr. Moore, so Trump is imposing these tariffs. Countries are retaliating against these tariffs. And you're saying this is a question of who blinks first, a game of chicken, as you called it. Hopefully, the threat of these tariffs is a negotiating tool, the way Trump sees it, to get these countries to the negotiating table and eventually, hammer out some kind of a trade arrangement. That's what they're trying to do with India as well. But what if that doesn't happen? What if countries don't come to the negotiating table and do not lower tariffs? Then are we looking at a full-blown trade war?
Well, so that gets into a kind of tit for tat potential trade war. I would say that just take India, for example. Well, if India gets into that's a trade war that India cannot win. In other words, if you raise your tariffs and we raise our tariffs, and you raise your tariffs and we raise ours, who's the big loser in that? India is. So we are we are the hub of the world economy. We do have an economic leverage over every other country because every other country has to trade with the United States. So Trump is using that leverage to get countries to do things that are in America's interest. And by the way, things that I mean, India should lower its tariffs. I mean, why wouldn't India lower their tariffs?
But tell me, Mr. Moore, the idea of these reciprocal tariffs, that the stuff that America exports to India, for example, Trump in his first term, he made a huge hue and cry around the Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and India has progressively reduced its duties on the Harley-Davidson motorcycles. But motorcycles are not the stuff that India exports to the US. India exports different things to the US. It exports gems and jewelry. It exports, generic compounds for making drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. So to tax at the same rate, that's what Trump is saying, right? Reciprocal tariffs. We tax you, we tariff you, how much you're tariffing us or how much you are taxing us. That would make sense if countries are trading the same things with each other. But that's not the case. India is buying different things from America as America is buying different things from India. So how will this work then?
That's true. That is true. You make a good point. But what I would say is that overall, if your tariffs are, say, I'm just picking out a number, I don't know what, let's say you have an average tariff rate of 15% and our average tariffs are 5%, we're going to want to see India bring those tariffs down. Now, you're absolutely right. The reason we have international trade and why trade is such an important thing for everyone is the old idea of the law of comparative advantage. There are some things that we make better than other countries, and there are some things that India makes better and cheaper than we do.
Yep.
And so it makes sense that we would sell our wheat to India and India would sell jewelry to the United States. There's no question about that. And it makes both countries richer. Like I do believe in the benefits of international trade. I think it's incredibly important. I'm just saying, let's have a policy that works for everybody. And as I said earlier, the United States does have a special position where because we are the most important, consumer market, and because every country like India needs to have access to that market, we can require countries to do things that they might not otherwise want to do because the cost of not doing it would be so negative.
So, Mr. Moore, do you think that with all these threats of tariffs and reciprocal tariffs and so on and so forth, what Trump is talking about, is he actually looking for individual trade deals with respective countries, whether it is with China or the European Union or India, outside of the global trading arrangements as it exists today, outside of the WTO trading framework? Do you think that's ultimately what Trump's goal is?
Well, that's a great question. I would say this. First of all, our major adversary and enemy in the world is China. India is not an enemy of the United States. Enemy is a close, important ally. China is an enemy. We believe they lie, they cheat, they steal. They are becoming more and more militarily aggressive. So they're a danger to our national security and to India's national security. And so I would put China in a very different category. China's up to no good, and they are that is going to be a separate set of negotiations. But I do believe that Trump wants us to move more towards bilateral trade deals rather than unilateral trade. Rather than multilateral trade deals. So
Okay.
we'll have a separate trade deal with India. We'll have a separate trade deal with Korea. We'll have a separate trade deal with Japan, and we'll negotiate that. Now we have a special situation with respect to Canada and Mexico because we do have something called the U.S. Canada-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, and I'm hoping that leads to a situation where we have minimal tariffs on in North America. But the answer to your question is yes.
Right.
We are moving more under Trump towards a bilateral trading system rather than multilateral.
All right. Stephen A. Moore from the Heritage Foundation and former economic advisor to Trump. Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for joining us.